realmente es la inspiración del receptor, al oyente que escucha, a que pueda configurar un escenario propio. Es un género totalmente libre en su construcción. Es un género totalmente libre.
Radio art is the invitation that we make to the receiver,
the radio listener.
Time to infer, space to grow.
Los ingredientes con los que vamos a trabajar son los conocimientos del lenguaje, la música, con el silencio.
There is no rigid diagram or structure that allow us to design radio art. You're listening to the voice of the
Para una mejor escucha, recomendamos el uso de auriculares.
Thanks so much for your interest in our backgrounds. It has been a very wonderful experience talking to lots of artists. And after we have crossed this boundary of trust, we realize that they become interested in what we do too. And that's a reflection of a dialogue that is generated from the point of view not of a journalist or an academic research, but from artists, which we both are. And I have worked a lot in recordings, and so the question of the formats and knowing that you almost started with digital gives you a lot of awareness of the media possibilities and the format possibilities of what can or cannot do with them. I was curious about, since you mentioned your bio and we saw your wife passing by, I guess and I presume that you've had a very strong relationship in terms of feeding each other with input and feedback and observations and reflections of what you have done throughout the years. How's that dialogue been going on? It's still going on in the same way it was when you started working together and that? How's that going?
Yeah, look, you are the first person that has ever asked that question, and I'm really delighted.
So glad.
So my partner Sarah and I met maybe about 35 years ago, and we bonded over a love of nature and going out and camping and traveling, and so we both established our recording label Listening Earth together, and we would talk about, you know, what we dreamed of it being, and you know, once we'd made this decision that it becomes just a nature sound label, she took up the role of doing photography. And her temperament is more earthy than mine, so she would be really good at landscape photography, where she'd have the camera on a tripod, she'd get the depth of the field right and the composition just right, and then click the button. Whereas I was okay with the birds. I'd have a long lens, handheld, and I'd be wandering around, and I'd be really quick, you know, because you've got to be quick with birds. So I would get a lot of bird photos, but she would do the landscape shots that gave context to the environmental recordings. So I'd be making the recordings, and she would be doing the images. And then we would get back to the office, and she would run a lot of the office. Again, it's one of those earthy things. I'd be doing a lot of the creative work, the editing and so on, but we'd be talking all the time about how to present something or which image was going to work on a front cover or things like this. And that continued up until maybe about 7 or 8 years ago, and we looked at our business. We were doing a lot of overseas field work and producing new albums and recordings, and we looked at our business and we saw that our income was just going down year on year on year. And it was because people were no longer buying recordings. They're all going onto Spotify and streaming platforms. And we both kind of took a deep breath and realized, our original vision was to create a high quality nature soundscape label. And whilst we've done that, and there's great value in the work that we've done over the decades, we realized that there wasn't a commercial future in it for us. And so we both kind of thought, oh, okay, so what are we going to do with the rest of our lives? Kind of thing. Our recordings are up there on Spotify, but there simply isn't. We haven't got the justification and the income to be continuing to make more. And it kind of felt like, no, it's time for something different anyway. And her dream had always been to become a potter. She'd always wanted to do this ever since she was a young woman, and she thought, oh, well, I'll do that when I retire. But of course, there's the time. So she studied with a local potter who was her mentor and teacher. She's got a studio in the town near where we live, and she's become a very fine artist. Meanwhile, I was thinking, well, what am I going to do? And I found that I was getting a lot of invitations to come and talk. And at first, I would be talking about our travels and our work and playing recordings and just entertaining people. But there was a particular occasion where I was invited to a large music festival in Australia. And when I got there, I found that our local ABC, our national ABC radio, Australian Broadcasting Corporation radio, wanted to record one of my talks. And they wanted to put it on a program called Big Ideas. And I thought at the time, if I'm going to do this, I better have a big idea. And it really made me think about what I was saying and what I was concerned with. I'm not just, why am I doing this and what am I learning from interacting with nature in this way? And so answering those questions in a more articulate way and actually putting it into words and providing examples of what I'm thinking about has now become what I do. And when COVID arrived, I kind of thought, well, if I'm ever going to write a book, now is my time to do it. So when travel and talks and public appearances was no longer something that I did, I sat down and wrote the book that has now become this book, Deep Listening to Nature. So I now found myself as an author and giving talks about what we can learn, not only about nature from listening, but what can we learn from nature by listening. And I'm learning every day, and so I'm doing that, and Sarah is doing her creative ceramic work, and the two of us have got these not quite as integrated lives as we used to have, but parallel and very compatible, and.
That's great. And it seems that the evolution has been very organic too. So, in this sense, since you mentioned the deep listening concept, do you have any opinion of the Paulina Oliveras' view on the phenomenon when she started writing and creating pieces on that deep listening concept?
Yeah, I don't know in any great detail what Pauline's work and thoughts have been, but I think I pick up the essence of it. And for me, deep listening is when you move beyond just hearing stuff and comprehending and so on. To me, deep listening is opening yourself to the possibility of being influenced by what you hear. So it's not about the sound particularly, it's not about your attention to it, it's how open are you? And I think in conversation with each other, and particularly when you're conversing with somebody who has different views, different values, different beliefs, different life experience, to really open yourself to being influenced by that person, to empathize, to move into their space through what they're saying. That to me is the essence of deep listening. And when you're talking about nature as being what your subject of listening, then it's first of all getting over this hurdle of thinking that nature has actually something to say to you. That is a massive cultural kind of brick wall that you have to remove and say, well, if nature was actually talking to me the way that another person talks to me and wanted me to hear what it's got to say, and that I'm going to be open and influenced by that, that's, to me, that is the essence of deep listening. It's listening beyond the superficial, beyond the species and the behaviors and all the little bits and pieces that your ears are hearing. It's listening. It's a mental process and an emotional process of vulnerability and humility, I suppose. So I don't really know what Pauline meant by it, but I think she would be nodding her head if in response to the kind of things that I'm thinking about. And of course, the term deep listening has now been applied much more widely to things like counseling, working within groups in business or in the community. And it's also been a word in this country at least, but I think internationally has been applied to Indigenous the way that Indigenous people, and particularly in Aboriginal culture in this country, they will say, you need to listen to the country. And to me, I think they're talking about the same thing. In my interaction with Aboriginal people, I've learned a lot from what they've said, and I'm sure it's quite a superficial understanding on my part. But nevertheless, this sense of communion, this sense of bonding through not just acoustic listening, but a presence of being in the landscape and feeling yourself in communion with it, seems essential to Indigenous thought around the world from what I understand. And it's what I've accidentally come to through my field recording practice. So hence, using those words, deep listening. And it certainly seems to resonate with people. I find that people will just look at the book cover and the title and go, oh, that's interesting. And, they'll pick it up and, before you know it, can I buy a copy? And so I'm feeling as though this is an idea it's not necessarily an idea whose time has come, but it is an idea that there is this ambient interest in the community, that we are seeking to find a deeper connection with nature, that listening is a novel, unexpected way of doing that. People, I haven't really thought about listening to the natural environment. Oh, well, okay, so how do you do that? What's involved? What do you learn? All of those kind of questions that bubble up when you're confronted with something novel and new. And so I've been saying over these decades of doing it, I've realized that this isn't just a superficial novelty. This is actually deeply profound, probably of the most importance, the greatest importance, that we do actually start not only listening to each other, but to be listening to all the other species that we share this planet with. And as I look around the world at the moment with all the conflicts that we have, we're not very good at listening to each other. And listening to nature is almost a qualitative difference in listening to each other. As we have language barriers, but in listening to nature, we have a comprehension barrier that is equally deep and profound. So all of that feeds into what I think of as deep listening.
Excellent. I have the book there.
Yeah, because you expanded the concept, because the concept is mostly associated with listening as techniques of listening for composition, and for musicians, in order to be liberated from composing music, understanding every sound as music, and letting that difference flow. We interviewed last year an artist who worked with Pauline Oliveros on that concept, DJ and turntable artist, abstract turntables of Maria Chavez. She lives in New York, but she's from Peruvian descent. She worked with Pauline directly, and also she had a sort of hearing problem. So it was very interesting, and it was very fascinating to get some examples that she brought into her attention. For example, I remember a story she told about a dolphin. Pauline was composing a piece for orchestra, an orchestra for open air, and also incorporating dolphins as she started studying some at a park in Miami. And she noticed that the trainer was treating the dolphins, and all of them followed the same path. He called them, they got the fish, and then went back swimming. But there was one particular dolphin that didn't respond to the trainer's calls and kept on swimming. And suddenly, when it was so hungry that he couldn't resist, he started jumping and getting the fish and coming back to water. She told the story in terms of knowing when to present a work or where to work on an idea. If you have an idea that is getting all your attention as the hunger of this dolphin, then you start doing it. And there was also some mentions concerning whispers and low volume sounds, which is also something that I was wondering, because 15 or so years ago, a very good friend of mine, she was doing music, she was making music at the time, and she asked me about, she wanted to record the sound of a tree growing or the sound of a tree moving. And I said, that should be very difficult because of the volume, because of the time the operation takes, and you need some sort of contact mix or contact mics that are so particularly tuned to this that they will also, and that's what I was wondering, they will also deliver a sort of very low volume sound.
Yep.
And if you start amplifying the sound, we're changing the nature of the sound at all. So when you mentioned multi-track recording, multi-track field recording, you start being tempted by the possibilities that separating voices present. We ourselves are working using this possibility Zoom presents now of working with separate audio texts. But it's true that there are some things which were not meant to be separated, and there are some things that are meant to be listened as a whole.
Yeah.
But I was wondering about the low volume experience and the question my friend asked me about how to record a tree.
Yeah.
I'd love to know about your experiences with that, if you have been able to record these microorganisms or dealing with micro sounds.
I haven't spent a lot of time doing this. I'm aware of how to do it, but I haven't done that. And I think the main reason is because I've been recording to allow other people to listen back to a recording and feel that they're actually in an environment. And a lot of the work that has been emerging in the last decade or two around these sort of microsonic environments, from a biological and nature point of view, it's just fascinating. And it does require special techniques, and it extends our knowledge of the communicative nature of the natural world. The way that insects will drum on the stems of roots or leaves in a kind of, a matrix, the matrix of the plants, to transmit vibrations over short distances. And we never knew that this was happening until recently. The whole aquatic and marine environment, until we had decent hydrophones and people were out there, it's like that Roger Payne recording of the humpback whales. When people heard that, it was the first time that people had heard underwater sounds back in the late 1960s, I think. So there's been so much of the sonic and communicative world that has emerged. And I've got to say, it hasn't been my focus to record that. I listen to those recordings and, you know, things like sounds being sent back from space probes as they go through the atmosphere of the, you know, the moon of Saturn or something like that. It's, you know, it's just extraordinary what we're coming up with, and shows us just how broad this whole field of sonics, or not even sonics, it transcends sonics. It becomes simply vibrational information is. So, you know, when mystics say the whole world vibrates with the whole of life vibrates, it's like, yeah, that makes sense. But I must admit, I haven't spent a lot of time really delving into it personally myself. And I think that's just my enduring fascination with birds and other terrestrial animals. Is like, oh, I've got a lifetime just listening to the birds in our front yard. I haven't got time to do all these other things.
Let other people do that. It's good to let people do things differently. When you start doing things just by yourself and you notice that you're the only one interested in that, you start thinking that if you don't do it, no one else would, and that's not true. We are able to grab some sort of section, a portion of things, and we offer that back to the reservoir, and all the blank spaces are for the ones coming after us to fill. So it's logical. Let other people do this microsound nature field recordings.
Yeah, a friend of mine recently said something that's just really stuck with me. I hadn't seen him for a little while, and so when he visited, I said, "Oh, what have you been up to? What have you been doing? What is mine to be done?" And that really just landed with me. I thought, only you know what is yours to be done. You can't justify it or explain it or contextualize it. You just know that this is what I have to do. At this time, in this place, whatever, in this life, whatever the context is. So yeah, I'm just doing what's mine to be done. I'm not universal in the possibilities of what can be done.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much for broadening our perspectives so generously.
I want to ask you, we talk about techniques, spec, about stereo recording, but you name binaural techniques, stereo, wide, close. My question is about audio spatialization, because when I listen your albums, that's a fabulous mix. How did you do that? Here is the secret. I don't do it. Nature does it. And all you have to do is to get into the right environment, and by that I mean an environment that has an integrity about it, that it hasn't been overly disturbed where it's lost that integrity, and get your microphones into an interesting place in that environment. And not all, it's not uniform. When you go into a place, you find that there's sort of aggregations and concentrations of animals. They might be in a little gully or a stream, or they might be on a particular. For instance, in the morning, if you're in, let's say, slightly hilly country, the eastern side of a hill will catch the morning sunlight. And so the insects are warmed up and they're active, and that's where all the birds will be, feeding and foraging on the eastern side of the hill. Whereas on the shaded side, the western side of the hill, it's pretty quiet, there's not much going on. So little things like that become, you look at the landscape and say, okay, where's the eastern side of the hill? Where is the concentration of low foliage where the small birds will forage, and where is the leaf litter that the ground foraging birds will be in? Where are the flight pathways that the big birds like hornbills might fly overhead in the morning as they fly out to their from their roost trees out to where they forage? All of these kind of things create an interesting sound picture. There might be some frogs, for instance, in that little stream. So you put them at a certain distance where they're not dominating, but they are a part of the soundscape. And so what you're listening to in the end, you're hearing all these kind of elements that are there naturally in nature. It's just that I've put you in a place where they move around you, and there are dynamics, and it's interesting sonically, texturally, frequency-wise, content-wise, distance, all of these kind of things. The aesthetics of sound is what it's one of those things that I'm always thinking about. And it's interesting with my colleagues that sometimes I realize, no, they haven't got that same aesthetic sense. They're more in terms of the biology and the behavior, which is important. But I guess coming from a musical background, fundamentally, I'm thinking about all these things of how do you capture the interesting movement and dynamics and diversity of an environment. So there's a bit of art to it, and personal connection, and there's a little bit of exploration and working out the right spot and the right balance and all of those kind of things. But yeah, essentially what you're hearing is what I heard. It's all there. It's not an artifice. Okay, thank you very much.
Great. You became a musician in your own terms, and that's fantastic.
Well, it's interesting, and I'll throw this in as a last thing to say. And it's taken me a long time to realize this because our language muddles things up. I don't know what it's like in your language, but it certainly does in English. My understanding is that nature is not a musical system. And there are specific reasons, you know, as a musician, you understand what the language of music is in terms of its physical structures of harmonies and note structures and scales and rhythms and so on. Look, you do find aesthetically pleasing and almost musical patterns in the sounds of nature, but fundamentally, nature is not musical. It's communicative, but not in the principles that govern our music. So, for instance, one of the most fundamental ones, almost every culture of Western of music around the world, especially indigenous, is very strongly rhythmic. You really don't find rhythm except in a very kind of proto form in nature. You get patterns of sound that we might think of as rhythmical, but the essence of rhythm, you might have a cicada going shh, 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 and you think, oh, that's rhythmical. No, it's not. It's just repetitious. The animal's just having a little neural mechanism that repeats the sound. And if you listen closely, you'll hear it hesitating and stopping and starting up again. The essence of rhythm is synchronization. That animals synchronize around a pulse that they have going in their head. And you can hear this, you know, a group of human musicians, you know, something like dun da 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 dun dun, now that dun da 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 dun dun, that beat is silent. There's no sound on it, but we hear it in our heads. So we have this pulse going, and that's the essence of music, that as animals we are synchronizing to this pulse. And when you synchronize on a pulse, you're synchronizing the sound, but what you're really doing is synchronizing minds. And that capacity is something not found in the animal world. It might be a proto-capacity in some animals, but certainly humans have taken that possibility, turned it into synchronized communication that we now call music. And so all the stuff, the melodies, the rhythms, the rhythm is the pulse is fundamental, but all the melodies and harmonies and textural stuff and instruments and stuff we throw on top of that is something uniquely human. And it's very possibly the origin of it's enabled our sociality, that we have become a hyper-social animal in the way that apes are not. And we can do music, and apes just can't keep a beat. So, it's a really interesting thing when we start to think about what makes us human. And for me, music is something that is probably biological, it's evolutionary, it goes back well beyond our species, back to other animals in the Homo lineage, Neanderthals and Denisovians and so on, possibly even as far back as Homo erectus. Whereas language is a very recent, and you can see the evolution of language from indigenous languages through to modern language. It's obviously a very recent development. But music is that mysterious thing that links us together as social beings, and it's just not present in nature. It's a really human evolutionary adaptation. A whole sonic strategy, a way of using sound that we have evolved, and it's turned us into the species that we are today, in large part. That's Andrew's little potted theory about about what music is and isn't.
We're going to quote this. I teach a music production 101 class at university, and one of the units is the concept of music. And what you're saying is very, very important to understanding music as a human construction.
Yes.
In that sense. So I'm very grateful for you to share that with us.
Thank you. I mean, I'm very cautious about, there's that whole thing of human exceptionalism that we think, oh, we do something that nature doesn't do. I think that this is one example. The other one that's often quoted is blushing, that we blush.
Yeah.
Which is, again, is a social thing. But I have written this up. It was going to be in my book. I ended up taking it out because I thought it was a bit of a diversion off into another topic, and a lot of people are thinking about this, and I didn't want to get caught up in everyone else's pet theory about the origins of music, because there are a lot of them. So I put it online as a supplementary chapter if you want to have a read of that, just to remind you of some of the things that I've said. It's on my website. The book that is probably have been most significant to me is also listed there as part of the references. It's called The Singing Neanderthals, and it's written by an archaeologist, a UK archaeologist, who's done a lot of work and thinks about music in the same way, that it goes back way beyond our species. And he's got a more academic approach to it. Mine is more coming from a nature sound point of view, listening to other animals, particularly in East Africa, and just thinking, now this is where we got music from. How does this?
Yeah.
How does the acoustic environment of East Africa possibly influenced our species and our development of this synchronizing of pulse? And East African birdsong is so repetitious. You have these almost polyrhythmic things going on in the landscape, none of which are rhythmic in that they're just repetitious, but you hear all these patterns, and it may have influenced us as well.
Thanks so much. And we have 2 minutes again.
Okay. And I still don't know much about you guys. Thank you for your time, for this conversation. It's my pleasure, Franco, Geraldo, and Franco. Thank you so much. And if you would like to send me that email, look, if there's any audio that you would like, I'm happy to offer that. There is some on my website, but equally, if there are specific things, and as to your question of listening, I'll respond to that. Okay. So this goes out as a radio program, so it's not a visual, it's not like a YouTube video podcast as well, is it?
It is. There is a YouTube version.
Okay. All right.
And we will tell you everything you want to know about us via mail or via other media. We'll send you that. Yeah.
Throw me some links. That's good.
Yeah, it's an honor for us to.
When do you think it will be published? It's a lot to edit.
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry about that. No, what sorry?
We're delighted.
El ruido es el mensaje.
Vamos por más, dice la rana, escúchame, ¿eh? Esto recién empieza.
Para una mejor escucha, recomendamos el uso de auriculares.
You're listening to The
El ruido
Noise
es el mensaje.
Indeed. Well, thank you very much for being here again for the third time.
Yeah.
That's all right. We consider that it's an abuse of the time of the people. So thank you very much. Look, I am enjoying the conversation with both of you, and oh, we too.
Thank you so much.
Your questions are bringing out. I don't normally talk like this, you know. I sort of do, in the sense that this is the way I enjoy talking and the kind of things I enjoy talking about. But it's rare that I find people draw this out of me organically, and I think it's a reflection of both of you, that you are very immersed in that sound listening social space, thinking about how we relate to sound. So I'm enjoying the conversation. It's an honor. Of course. Yeah, it's an honor for me too. Thank you. Well, thank you very much. I want to ask you some technical aspect of your work. It's a very personal thing, really. In fact, do you prefer mono or stereo in the time to do field recording, for example? Or do you prefer mono or stereo at the moment when you do the records? And then I guess that you edit your material, your records, and then do the mix, and then do the field notes. So, yes. All right. The answer might be a little bit different than what you may be anticipating. In the Northern Hemisphere, birdsong is virtuosic. Solo singers, particularly in the breeding season, you get a bird sitting on the top of a branch or a favorite song perch, and it's just pouring out a stream of elaborate and diverse song. And so it's no surprise that early field recordists used a mono setup, a single microphone, possibly in a big parabolic dish, to act as like a telephoto lens to capture that single individual species, because it is doing the most amazing things. In Australia, it's very different, and I don't know about in your part of the world, but in Australia, which incidentally is where we now understand that songbirds evolved, the birdsong behaviors are far more diverse. They're not limited by a short breeding season as they are in northern temperate regions. And so our birdsong and our bird behaviors are much more collective. Birds travel in flocks. They might roost together. We have a thing called cooperative breeding, where a breeding pair of birds will be helped by sometimes a community of up to a dozen or so other birds. They might be offspring from previous years. They might actually be birds from other groups that have kind of been adopted. So you get genetic interchange between groups of birds. So we have a lot of behaviors which either birds living in groups, or else they're bonded throughout their lifetime. They live resident in a particular area as a lifelong pair bond. The reason I'm saying all that is that if you're recording a group of birds, it's much better to have stereo, where you get, you can hear the dynamics. One group of birds with one bird in one channel and the other group talking back to them in the other channel. So, and also from my perspective as a soundscape recordist, I want to record the whole environment, and space is a vital part of that listening process. So for me, stereo is an absolute. I don't think I've ever recorded in mono, to be honest with you. And I figure, well, we have two ears, so you have two channels. And if you listen on headphones, my attempt is to create that sense of space. And it's interesting, that mono stereo thing, because I do have colleagues that record in mono, and of course they've got a very different approach to what they're doing in the field. They're after the individual vocalization, whereas I'm always trying to get the whole thing. And when you record in stereo the soundscape like this, one of the things that I've come to is an understanding of the spatialization of sound. And on a stereo recording, you think of left and right, but it's also distance. And I learned this from a landscape photographer in Australia, Peter Dombrovskis. He was a very well-known and influential landscape photographer. And I looked at his photographs, and very often what you would see is something perfectly in focus in the foreground, plant or some lichen on rocks or something. And then there would be something interesting in the middle distance. And way off in the background of the photograph, you would see the whole mountain range. And so in one photograph, in one image, he captured the entire environment from the intimate to the landscape view. And you can do the same in sound. But to do that, you have to get the mics in the right place so that you get birds coming around the microphones very closely, other birds in the middle distance, and some way off in the far, you can hardly hear them. They're several kilometers away. And so this has been my focus, is not only getting space in the stereo sense, but in the distance sense as well. And that creates so much movement. Now to do that, once again, you have to think about the birds in the environment. And for instance, small birds will often utilize low shrubs and bushes. They might come through the canopy, and they often have light, delicate calls which really work at close range. So you put your microphones in a position to record that, knowing that medium-sized birds that have deeper voices will be a little bit further away for the most part, and there will be other species that you can hear. There are only certain species that you will hear from, a kilometre away. So all of this creates a picture of the environment in the same way that a landscape photographer will create a picture. I'm creating an audio picture of the environment, and stereo is just necessary. It's not even a choice, it's just you have to do this. I have never recorded in multi-channel. Once again, I have colleagues that do, and it's just never been a format that I didn't begin recording. That's really only been the last decade or so that people have really pursued that, and I've heard some of their playbacks, and I've never found it convincing. It just feels like a technological artifice that's unnecessary, because a good binaural recording will give you a spectacular sense of space. So I've never particularly done the spatial thing. And then once I've got the recordings, when I'm in the studio, that introduces a whole new range of considerations. So in the early days, I did think of mixing sounds together, and I found pretty quickly that as soon as you mix two sounds, you destroy the authenticity of what you originally recorded. And there might be rare occasions when that you can get away with it. For instance, there might be some little crickets calling in the morning, and at the same time the first bird song begins. I might have a recording of the crickets, a recording of the bird song, you put them together, and oh yeah, that's what I heard. But most of the time, you're recording two things at two separate times, possibly in two separate locations, and you put them together. And if you didn't know, maybe it would be convincing, but when you do know, you think, no, something's not right about this. It's like you put frogs and birds together, the frogs call at night, the birds are calling in the morning, you lose that coherence, And it's an instinctive thing, you just feel it. I sometimes analogize it, it's a little bit like you listen to Beethoven or you listen to Mozart, and they both create wonderful music, but you don't play them at the same time. It's just, you don't mix them together, it's just, you just muddle up the whole thing. And it's the same with natural sound, that even when there's silence or near silence, there's an integrity to it. And when you start blending recordings and overlaying them, you lose that integrity of the moment and the place. There are a few occasions where, for instance, an educational purpose where you want two things at the same time to illustrate something or other that, okay, you sacrifice that authenticity. But in terms of our publications, I certainly haven't done it through the bulk of the time. I might have done it originally when I didn't know any different, but I certainly wouldn't do it now. So the mix becomes very, very simple when you do that. You don't have to do all that much. You've just got the two stereo channels, and most of the work that I do is cleaning up a recording. I use Isotope RX and have for many years, and become very adept at cleaning up aspects of the recording that are mostly to do with the technical limitations of your recording equipment or anthropogenic sounds like a plane flying overhead or something. And you get a fantastic recording, but there's a plane in the distance, and so I'll take it out. I know it's authentic to have the plane in there, but that's not my purpose. My purpose is to let people immerse themselves in a natural environment and be reminded of the integrity of that environment, not to be reminded of the fact that it happens to sit under a flight path. That's a different topic. So I will take out those anthro sounds. There might be things like a water droplet will fall from the canopy onto the microphone with a great big thud. You want to get rid of that. Whereas the water droplets landing on the leaf litter all around, oh no, that's beautiful. That's gives you that sense of near space. And so the edit becomes very simply a process of cleaning up the recording. I very rarely take anything out, so it's just a continuous. And most of the time, particularly overseas recordings where I'm unfamiliar with the environment, most of the time that I'm spending preparing a recording is working out what I've actually recorded, finding out the species and doing those, dividing the recording up into tracks based upon, here's this species and this one and this one, and trying to work out what I've actually recorded because I didn't know at the time. And so I'm coming back after the event and doing that. And there's a little bit of choosing which of the field recordings I'm actually going to work with, which is the interesting one. And if I find myself in a nice location, I might spend 3 or 4 mornings recording there, and then becomes a choice of, well, which bits am I going to, which recording am I going to base a program on? So that's sort of the way that I work. There are a few occasions where I'll create an album out of separate recordings. I think we recorded in East Africa, and I wanted to present some of the animals that you encounter in that part of the world, and things like elephants and zebra and lions, and of course they were all recorded in separate places, separate times. So that is going back to that kind of postcard approach of, well, here's this and here's this, and there is changes of scenes throughout the mix. But each scene is an integral, one single take, one single, no mixing. But it is, and you kind of theme it a little bit, like you begin in the early morning, you move through to the daytime, and you finish in the dusk or something like that. But these are some of the creative agendas that I apply in thinking about a final mix. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, it's so mind-blowing.
Really?
Yeah, and it's fantastic how...
It just seems very ordinary and normal to me.
Yeah.
When I bought my Zoom recorder,
Me too.
I got this 15 years ago, almost. A new journey, not a new path, a new journey open to me in the listen, when I start to listen. At this moment was the same like you, no? Oh, this is wonderful. Oh, this is wonderful. Oh, this is wonderful. I have a lot of archives of urban soundscape. Wow, I remember that record the trips in the bus, in cars, and by bicycle. I woke up in the morning, early, very early in the morning, to go to some parks in this city to record the birds, the water in the fountains. Wow! Oh, you start to listen, and then when you put off the headphone and you listen the recorder, was very different that you listen. What's happened with you, with your records in this moment? The question that I want to do is if when you listen a sound that you like and you want to get this sound to your work or to your own archive for personal purpose, sometimes it's not the same because the transduction. Yes, you're right. I mean, the microphones and the recorder create a document of what you're hearing, but they're not what you actually heard at that time. I have become so familiar with my equipment now that I don't ever use headphones in the field, because as soon as you put a pair of headphones on, you have a leakage of sound from the real environment plus the technologically mediated sound through your microphones. And you lose your connection with the environment as soon as you put the headphones on. So I never do that, and I just listen, and then you get all the spatialization, you hear where things are. And I know my equipment really well, so I know what they're going to do with that sound field. I know how they're going to render it. And so I simply set them up, and that's partly a proximity thing, that I know that I'm listening. For instance, I'm recording a pond full of frogs. If I get really close, I know that I'll get some stereo separation of the animals, but the sound it'll be right there, right in front of your face. If I stand back 10 meters, it will blend together, but I will get a little bit of the acoustic of the environment, and it will it will create more of a homogeneous sound. If I move 200 meters away, I will get that sound as a little pinpoint in a much bigger landscape. And so you make these kind of decisions based upon the aesthetics of the sound itself. For instance, a frog pond that is just full of sound, I might think, well, actually, I want to get a little bit closer just to differentiate it, because otherwise it's just this great, massive sound. Other things where you might only have 3 or 4 frogs squalling, you think, well, I can step a little bit further back because I'm not losing that definition with distance. I'm still hearing those 3 or 4 frogs, but I'm putting them in a bigger context. So those kind of things I'm just familiar with, because I know what the microphones will do with what my ears are hearing, with what the acoustic space is presenting. The other thing I'd say in this context, and it's very important with nature recording, is that the recorder is relatively unimportant. It's the microphones that you have to think about. The microphones give you different possibilities, and as I was saying originally, long shotgun microphones, no good for soundscape. Mediums, yep, you can create a kind of field of visual view, stereo soundscape. The rig that I use now is 2 omnidirectional microphones in a binaural setup. But it's not just a binaural in front of you, the way that your ears focus forward. I've created a system that is symmetrical back to front, so I can put them anywhere in the field and they will record left and right, up and down, space, backwards and forwards. I don't have to worry about, a bird's come and sat right behind the microphones, right in the blind spot, and it's going to sound awful. It's going to sound really close but muffled. This is a kind of I call it an ISO binaural system, ISO being equal. So it records the whole stereos or the whole sonic space and renders it as stereo in an equal way. A bit like a fisheye lens on a camera, if I could describe it that way. So for me, I'm listening organically with my ears, but I also know what my equipment is going to do, and I will position it appropriately, locate it in that sound field to get the recording that I'm hoping to get. I don't know whether that quite answers your question, but that's my response anyway.
It is great because we all seem to be and have the same model and not remember buying the same model 2017, aware that it was out of catalog because of the sound of the microphones. It impressed me, the sound of the microphones of this Zoom model. But my experiences have shown me that it's true what you mentioned, that microphone colors in certain way sounds. And the fact that you have a microphone setup that doesn't color as such, or that you recognize and you can work with the colors they bring. It makes us think of what would have happened if the history of phonography would have started with this, although it was with the cylinders. I was thinking about Eric from Boston, who started recording tribes with the cylinders, but the fact that the cylinder couldn't render a more lifelike image, you start missing frequencies and you start missing things.
Il rumore, qual era non me lo ricordo più?
Il rumore è il messaggio.
Il rumore è il messaggio.
Il rumore è il messaggio.
Para una mejor escucha,
recomendamos el uso de auriculares.
El ruido es el mensaje.
And in this sense, I was wondering about the formats. What has been your travel through formats? Do you start recording in analog form, in analog tape, reel-to-reel, cassettes, or you started in digital? How was your process and your path on that?
I was very fortunate to start at the beginning of the digital era with a Sony D10 recorder.
Great.
One of the first DAT recorders. And I remember speaking with a colleague who was elderly at the time. I was just beginning, so this is 30 years ago. He's passed on since, but he had always recorded analog, and he had built for him, his name was John Hutchinson, and he recorded in the deserts in northwestern Australia. He was a surveyor, so he spent a lot of time out in the field. And what he would do is he had this a 3-in-1 unit built. It had a reel-to-reel recorder, it had an acetate disc cutter, and a shortwave radio. And this would run off the truck battery, and he had a mono microphone. He would find out where a bird was roosting. He would take the microphone out on a cable from park the truck near the bush, take the microphone out and try and hang the microphone in the bush without disturbing the bird while it was sleeping, and then wait until the next morning and record it on the reel-to-reel, choose the part of the recording that was good and splice all the sections of tape together, and then cut an acetate disc in the desert, in the field. And I remember talking to him about doing digital editing on a computer where you do a crossfade, and he asked me, so what is a crossfade? And I'm explaining, well, it's when one sound fades out and the other one fades in at the same time, and so you get this kind of blend. And he was just shaking his head, and for him a crossfade is a razor blade and a piece of tape, and you cut it and you sticky tape the two bits of tape together. So I was very blessed to always record in digital. Of course, I've had to transfer all the original DAT tapes that I had up until about 2002. And at that time, I transitioned over to a solid-state recorder, the Sound Devices 7 series, which I've used ever since and continue to use because they are just so robust in the field. There have been times where, for instance, in Africa, there was one time I left my microphones out all morning and came back about 2 in the afternoon, and the sun had shifted, and the sun was hitting my recording equipment, and the recorder was so hot that I could not touch it. It must have been around about 70 or 80 degrees. It was almost melting the plastic of the bag around it. And yet, it survived. It was still recording, ticking away happily, and I could just turn it off with one finger on the button and manage to get the power off and let it cool down. And it, no problem, continued working. So for me, having a robust piece of equipment was absolutely necessary. And similarly with microphones, I use Sennheiser microphones because they behave predictably and reliably in the field. I've recorded tropical rainstorms where the humidity is just so, you can see the water floating past, and yet these microphones don't snap or short out. And equally temperatures, hot and cold. So having that kind of equipment, you were saying earlier about the investment of time and energy to go into the field. When you travel halfway around the world, you need equipment that isn't going to fail on you because there's no opportunity to repair it or to source an alternative. And actually, many of my early field trips, I would go out with a single pair of microphones and a single recorder, but in more recent times, I think there was one occasion where I was out recording and I put my microphones in one spot and I'm listening from a distance away and I'm thinking, there's not much going on over there, but there's a lot going on over here. If I put my microphones in this other spot, I'd be getting a great recording now, but instead I've wasted a morning. And I realized now if I had 2 microphones, 2 sets of equipment, I could capture both at the same time. And now I'm kind of thinking, oh, Andrew, this took me how many decades did it take me to realize this? So now I travel with several field recording kits. And each morning I can put them in different places. And, I've got the place that I think it's going to happen. Another place, well, it might happen, but I don't think it's going to happen over here, but I've got a third kit. I'll put it over here just in case. And so I end up with much more material from a field session and the investment of time and energy and travel than I would have if I just went with the one recorder. It ends up being a little bit bulky, but I've managed to get it down in size and weight to the point where it is actually manageable. And on the rare occasions where I've been commissioned to make a recording, a soundscape, an environmental recording for maybe a local council or something like this, it's a really useful approach to go into the environment and choose a few locations where you think things might be happening and to put a couple of microphones out. And then, if you get the right morning, then you get several bites of the cherry, as we say.
Wonderful study. That's organic growth. Yeah, growing in time with time and making the right decisions because of that, because of the amount of time you.
And another aspect of it, again, that I've learned recently is I purchased a pair of hydrophones, and to not just be listening to the acoustic space around me, but to be thinking about, well, where's the water? And if I put hydrophones in, I'm recording the underwater soundscape, which is otherwise inaudible to me, but I'm recording that as well as the terrestrial soundscape. So you start getting all these different layers in the environment, and that becomes another thing to play with.
Yes, yes. The environment.
It's another dimension.
Yeah. The environment have their own story to tell.
I often think of it as the microphones having their own adventures. And sometimes those adventures get... There are times when, I've left microphones out in Africa, and I listen back in the morning, and when I retrieve the microphones, and I remember one occasion where I picked up the microphone rig, and I'm looking at the ground and thinking, there's an elephant footprint right next to where the tripod was. And I listen back to the recording, and I can hear the animal sort of padding closer and closer and closer. And because it's a binaural recording, you get this amazing sense of space. And I can hear the animal right over the microphones. I can hear the breath coming down its trunk. And I'm realizing my microphones were lucky to survive. There's another occasion where I put my mics out in the Australian bush, and I had a kookaburra, and I could hear it calling, and I could hear it flying in very distinctive wing beats, and it lands on a branch nearby, and the next thing it flies and it's landed right on top of my microphones. And then it proceeds to bash something. It's got some prey in its bill, and it proceeds to bash its dinner on my microphone and kill it before flying off. And I looked at my microphone when I retrieved it, covered in mud and dirt, and what's happened here? So, anyway, some of the amusing things that happen.
It's amazing.
Okay, 4 minutes. Yes. Would you like to reconvene? Would you like to go again?
Es la invitación que silencia al receptor oyente escucha para que pueda configurar un escenario propio. Es un género totalmente libre en su construcción. Es un género
Radio art is the invitation that we make to the receiver, the radio listener.
Los ingredientes con los que vamos a trabajar son los elementos del lenguaje. Música, contexto, silencio.
There is no regular restriction that allow us to design radio art. You're listening to the noise of the message.
Para una mejor escucha, recomendamos el uso de auriculares.